create some sort of organization. Now we want to use borders when space or similarity of info is at issue. In other words, I've got a lot of quantity or a lot of similar items, and just spreading them out on the page isn't really going to define or separate them enough. I want to use borders to actually break those up into groups, framed by the borders. I mean, you can think of things like a map. Just having different states, different colors might not be an adequate way to divide them. A border helps make things a little clearer. Now in UI, it gets even more concerning because we tend to have a lot of quantity, text, or similar information. So borders will allow us to group them accordingly. Now grab your textbook. I want to show you an example. Take a look at 735. It's a great example of using borders. It's figure 13.8. There we've got a variety of information: municipality, department, we've got location and personnel information. Now what they do well is a couple things for this form fill-in UI. One is that the borders adequately show differences between the elements, and especially differences in types of selection or information. The other thing it does really well is they provide a title in each border section, so there's a logical design to it. I know that the thing on the left is all jurisdiction information, and the stuff on the right is about location and personnel. There's no guessing. It's clear that these things are bordered out for a reason and that they consist of different subgroups. Here's a great example of using borders. Now in contrast, instead of using borders, we can use white space. I think the idea here is, why add clutter when you can just use space to create organization? Now as I said, borders will be very effective when you have a lot of information and not a lot of space or real estate to work with. But if you do have the luxury of being able to space things out, then go ahead and use white space and see if that creates enough separation for the user. Again, I have an example in the book from page 731. If you turn there, you'll see figure 13.2, really nice white space grouping. It's the same information that we just saw on the border example. Notice that they maintained the use of titles to keep things clear and separate, but because there was so little information or so little going on this page, they could use white space pretty effectively to divide up all the stuff that we needed to separate. So white space can be equally effective for organization. So how does this change for web pages? Well, with web pages, it doesn't differ too much, but we have the added benefit of being in a browser. HTML and various types of HTML language are very flexible in that they basically resize and scale based on browser and resolution. So it gives us the ability to have really an interface of any size. Now, of course, the downside to this is that our interface could be any size. So we have to create an interface that looks so good or is so flexible that it will look good whether it's on a small resolution or high resolution. Just skipping ahead for a second to the very last point on this slide, avoid horizontal scrolling. This is exactly the sort of problem you get into if you didn't plan your browser or your interface for multiple sizes. So horizontal scrolling, terrible, terrible thing. We all hate doing it on websites. Avoid it if we can. So how do we design a web page well? Well, holding true to our principles, a web page should be efficient, it should be logical, and really self-explanatory. I don't need an instruction manual to know how to navigate a web page. Hopefully. One of the things you can do is picture the page like a grid. And why would we do that? Well, picturing the page like a grid essentially lets us set up the whole thing and figure out, is it flexible? Is it balanced? And do we have all the components in a logical place? Take a look at figure 13.34. And it's on page 754. Here we have an example of someone who gridded out their web page design ahead of time. Now, this has so many benefits. Besides keeping the elements organized, it allows you to see really how long the page is going to be and how much stuff you're putting on it. So we can avoid some of those classic web page design pitfalls before we even begin the actual content management. This gets back into some of the things we've talked about with web pages already. We always want shorter web pages, only a couple scrolls down, otherwise it's content overload. Now, sometimes a long page will make sense. You click on a news article from the home page and you've got a single page news article read. Now, again, most sites don't do this, possibly because of ad revenue. They want to drag it out over separate pages so you see more ads. But also, we just don't like long web pages. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. We will more typically break it up to make it a little easier for the user to see all at once. It also is very helpful for mobile phones too, which are now an increasingly popular web browser. Simply because on a phone, you've got less connectivity, less broadband to get the information, so you'll want it in more digestible chunks, shorter pages. Either way, unless you really feel the need for a long page, short pages are best, so design your grid or your web page organization accordingly. Now, I've said a few times that the critical information should be front and center. Now, typically speaking, navigation is going to be the most important thing on our web page, so we have that at the front, or at the center, or at the first thing on the left. But sometimes there's other critical or time-sensitive information that we want. Think about the Red Sox, especially on this week where we've had a few rainy days. What do you think is the most time-sensitive information for Red Sox or for someone who has tickets to a game? Well, the most time-sensitive information a baseball team can have is tonight's game. So that information, if you go to redsox.com, is located on the front center of the page. So if I'm worried if my game is rained out, I can see any rain delays or cancellation information right there. Or if I just want to know the score, again, most time-sensitive information, all the today's game information is front and center. So the critical information is right there, first thing I see, and then I can navigate to any additional information or content that I'm looking for. Now, hopefully what you're seeing in our discussion is that even though web pages have some different or unique attributes to them, organization is pretty consistent. We want to create a workflow or a process for the user that comes naturally, that's clear and easy to understand. And being clear and easy to understand will encourage people to use it. We'll go back and use it again and again because it's so easy. There's a reason Yahoo was the #1 portal for so long, and may still be, even though they're not the #1 search anymore, because they had a great layout and they're easy to use. So this is really important for us as UI designers. We want to make something that really embraces the user, that really almost holds their hand without them knowing it. It's a very natural guide to the user's workflow. There's a maxim in this chapter that I think is really, really useful. Probably one of the most important maxims that we've seen this semester. Designers work hard, so users don't have to. And it makes sense, right? That's really what this is all about. We put in all the effort up front to make something that's usable, navigable, really effective and efficient. That way, our users don't have to put in that same time and effort. They've got something already that works great. And this is exactly why we teach HCI now. It's back in the day, we just made programs, we made systems, and we expected to train users to figure out how the heck to use it. That was our process. Give them a big manual, let them figure it out. Well, nowadays, we actually make the effort to help the user, to give them something they want to use. Part of that's competition. Part of that is we want our product or service to be the #1, the most frequently used. But part of it is a recognition that really if we provide something that's easy to use, that's clear, that makes sense, our users will embrace it, it will be more popular, it will be more efficient, it will get the job done more effectively. That's what HCI is all about.